Hey guys, today we are going to be finishing up our 1 point perspective. Okay, so I have everything erased that I don't need, except for this line up here. I forgot that one. Silly me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off with outlining out everything, all the lines that we do need, with either a Sharpie pen, like this one, the Ultra Fine Point, or a black colored pencil. So if you don't have your Sharpie marker or Sharpie pen, you can use a black colored pencil and that will work out just fine. Okay, so let's get started. You want to just go through and outline everything that you have so far here. Just like this. Okay, so you're going to outline everything on your paper, and I'll see you back here in just a minute. Okay, now we are going to start with our sky here. And when we are coloring in our sky, we want to keep in a couple of bits of information, a couple of points in our brain. One, we don't really want to put a sun in here because the sun will instantly make it look a lot more elementary than what we're going for. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of color in a nice blue sky, and I want to make sure that I'm coloring in nicely and neatly and that I am not making it too directional, right? So I don't want to make it super obvious what direction I colored in. Okay, so whenever I'm coloring, I always like to do a rounded kind of back and forth, almost like a soft scribble, so that I get a nice base color without being too directional. Okay, that way people can't look at it and be like, oh, I see that you colored back and forth like this. Okay, I'm also using a kind of a medium to light pressure so that I don't end up with any textures that I don't want in my sky. Because typically on a regular clear sky day, a blue sky day, we don't really have a lot of texture in our sky. Okay, so I'm going to finish this up here and I will meet you back whenever I'm finished and we'll talk about the rest of our drawing here. Okay, so I have colored in all of my sky here, and I'm going to work on my trees. Now, for your trees, you can choose to do either a summer theme or you can do a fall theme. And I think that today I'm going to do a summer theme, and we're going to talk about how the light is hitting our trees and how that's going to affect the colors and the shades of our trees. Okay, so if our sun is up here off paper, okay, the tops of the trees are going to be brighter in color compared to the bottoms of our trees because they are much closer to the sunshine. Okay, so I'm going to have lighter colors up here. I'll have kind of medium and darker colors down here just a little bit. So to get started, I do want to use a lighter green. So I have this jade green here. Let's see, I have a kind of a yellow green, and then my regular green here. Okay, so I have these three greens to work with, but I can also work with yellow to lighten up and brighten up my green a little bit. And I can also use a blue to darken up some areas of my trees here. Okay, so I'm going to use one of these two greens here. And I think I'm kind of going to do a mix of both because I can't make up my mind right now. So I have yellow green and jade green. And so let's start with the yellow green here. I'm going to lightly color in my treetops here, the whole thing using a light pressure. And I want to make sure I use a light pressure because if I use a harder pressure, then the colors will not want to blend together as well. And then that can kind of be a problem. So I'm going to color in my whole tree area. I want to make sure that I'm coloring right up against the line so I don't end up with these weird white spaces. And again, I'm kind of using a rounded movement whenever I color because it makes it more even and I have less liney looking coloring. Okay, so I'm going to color this whole thing in and I'll see you in just a minute. Okay, so I have my base color done here. I used the yellow-green color. If you were doing yours in fall colors, a good base color for you would be maybe like a nice orange color, and you can use a couple of different oranges in this if you wanted to. But a nice orange would be a good base color. Okay, so I have my first layer here. And whenever you're coloring in with colored pencils, it's good to have several layers, right? So that means you're coloring over the same space a couple times. And it's really good to make sure that you're using multiple colors. So again, I have all of these colors here to help me make my trees. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go in with a little bit of the yellow. And my yellow is going to go across the top here. And I want to be careful to blend this so that I don't end up with a weird line. Okay, so the highest parts of my trees up top here are going to be the brightest because again, they're closer to the sun, right? So they're going to be brighter, right? And down here is going to be more shadowed because they are not as close to the sunlight. They have stuff blocking their way, so there's going to be more shadows. So I'm just kind of lightly coloring in here. You can kind of see the color a little bit. I hate how this distorts the color, but I'm coloring up here nice and light. So I'm adding just a little hint of yellow. I don't want this to be like blazingly, blaringly yellow. I'm just warming up my first green by adding another layer of yellow on top of it. Okay, so I'm kind of hitting those up here, just like this. Okay, and I'm going to add in, using my darker green right here, I'm going to come down here and do the same thing across the bottom. Okay, so I'm adding in a nice light pressure. I don't want to get too crazy with it. So I'm bringing this down here. Let's see. I'm going to kind of soften this just a little bit on the back. Like I have a weird point going on. All right, let's try that again. Okay, so then again, I'm using kind of a medium to light pressure. I'm going to bring this up here just a little bit. Okay, so I'm just lightly adding a tiny, tiny little hint of a slightly darker green down here. Okay, so it's already starting to look a little bit more dynamic. You can see my lighter area up here. You can see the medium area that only has one layer of color on it, and you can start to see this kind of darker area down here. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up here a little bit more. Just like this. And I'm going to actually end up bringing this a little bit higher right up here. I'm going to go the opposite direction because I feel like with this, for some reason, this one is being a little persnickety. So I'm going to change directions just a little so I can soften this line that's happening right here, okay, because we don't want to have that line. Okay, bring this back down here. I'm going to add another layer just to kind of darken this area and smooth it out towards the bottom. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go in with my blue and add a little bit of slightly darker areas, right? So maybe down here it's just a tiny bit darker, right? So I'm just very lightly going over this with my blue. I don't want my trees to actually look blue. I'm just slightly darkening the color just a little bit down towards the bottom. Right down here. Okay, so you guys can kind of see how it's a little bit darker. Okay, so I have my yellow area, I have my one layer of yellow-green, I have my green or my dark green color and a little bit of blue down here. And I think I'm going to go back over this and kind of blend using my yellow-green again. Okay, so this is a second layer on top of my yellow-green. And I want to make sure that I'm overlapping with the color areas that I've already, or with the areas that I've already colored in. All right, so I'm kind of going over my yellow area. Again. Okay, and then I'm going to fill in the rest of this. Okay, so I've colored in all of this, and I think that just for good measure, I'm going to take my yellow here. I'm going to lightly bring my yellow back down just a little bit further. And I'm just using a very, very light pressure because I don't want to make it super yellow. I'm just kind of warming things up a little bit. Okay. Sometimes whenever you're using colored pencil like this, in order to make it look more dynamic, if you're very thorough with your layers, it gives it a lot more depth to it, right? Which ends up making it look more like an advanced art piece instead of an elementary style art piece, which is kind of what we're trying to do, right? That's why we can't put a sun in our picture. So I'm bringing my yellow all the way back down here, just like this, okay? Because again, I don't want to end up with this weird stripe situation going on, okay? Because then your tree will look like a weird version of Neapolitan ice cream. And we just don't want that because trees don't really look like that in real life. Okay, I'm going to take my darker green now, and I'm going to bring this up just lightly to overlap in the middle. Just very, very lightly. Okay, again, if you were using fall colors, you could use reds as your darker parts. You can use yellow towards the top like we did here. Sometimes people even like to put a little bit of green in there. And then with the fall colors too, you can have more obvious leaves just a little bit, like a few patches of color, because we know that sometimes trees don't really all change colors at the same time, or they're not always the most consistent. So I'm overlapping. I brought yellow all the way down. I'm bringing my darker green up a little bit further. So I have a nice transition between my different colors here, and it makes it look more dynamic. Okay, so dynamic things are generally more interesting to look at because they have more going on, right? That's kind of like if you just wore a plain beige jumpsuit every day, it would be kind of boring. It wouldn't be a very dynamic outfit. Okay, coloring your treetops using only one colored pencil can kind of be a little boring, like a beige jumpsuit. So I want to make sure that I am adding lots of color to this. It makes it a little bit more lively. And I think that I'm done with I think I'm pretty happy with my treetops here. Okay, So again, it's harder to see up close. I feel like this distorts the colors a little bit, but we have our yellow green going down to our darker green here. Hold on, this part's bugging me. There we go, lots and lots of layers. Okay, so again, if you're using fall colors, you might start with an orange base. You might have some more yellow towards the top. You might have some more reds or brown toward the bottom. Okay, and then you would want to have those same overlapping on the blending so that it comes out with nice smooth transitions and it doesn't end up looking like weird stripes. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on our tree, or not tree branches, our tree trunks. And I want to get out, of course, my brown colored pencil. And I actually think that in my pack, I have a couple of browns. Okay, I have 2 browns. Now, if you are using a package of colored pencils and you only have regular brown in it, we're gonna do this together. Okay, so on your tree, if the light is coming from way up here, okay, and the tree is hitting here, or not the tree, the light is hitting your tree here. Okay, the first thing is that we're gonna have a slightly darker area up here towards where the tree top is, where those leaves are covering that tree just a little bit. Okay, and then it's gonna be a little bit darker towards the left side of our tree trunk. Okay, now if we only have one brown color, right? This one is a nice tan and I'll probably end up using that. But if you only have this brown, okay, what you can do is you can figure out your shadow situation here. So I'm coloring in kind of a light medium pressure like this, because I know I have more of a shadow here and more of a shadow on this side. And I'm going to darken this up just a little bit here. Okay, and then on this part that I still have white, I'm going to go through and lightly color that in. Okay, now I'm going to go back and darken some of this up just a little bit on the very edge of the line here. Okay, so I kind of, I'm almost like outlining this area and this area here. Like so. Okay, and then I'm going to go back over a medium pressure and kind of blend these two together so it's a nice smooth transition, just like we did with our treetops, but this time we're only using one colored pencil. Okay, now one of the other things that you can do is if you want to warm this up a little bit, if you're like, man, I think this brown is a little cool feeling, you could go over this area very lightly with a yellow. What I'm going to end up doing on mine with the tan is I'm going to smooth this out first. And I'm going to just take my tan using a medium to light pressure, and I'm going to color over the whole thing, right? So if I use a medium to light pressure, first of all, it's going to kind of warm this up just a smidge. See how I'm layering over that? And the tree trunks, I don't really care about my directional lines as much because as long as I'm going up and down, it makes sense with the natural texture of a tree. Tree bark kind of generally runs up and down. So if it's a little bit more textured here and I can see that, it's not as big of a deal. We still want it to look a little more realistic and less like pencil scribbles, but if you're coloring kind of straight up and down, it works for this part. Okay, so I went over this with my tan. Again, if you don't have a tan in your colored pencil box, that's okay. You can use just your regular brown. If you want to use a slight bit of yellow, like a very light layer of yellow, and then go back over it with your regular brown, you can do that too. Okay, it's up to you. But I'm going to finish up all of my tree trunks here. Okay, so that finishes that up there. Now, a quick note before we move on. If you have chosen summer, your grass is pretty easy because it's going to be green. And if you've chosen fall, you need to make sure that you're using a kind of a tan color for your grass, because if you have bright green grass and you have fall looking trees, they just will not go together. Okay, so I'm going to use a regular green here, and I actually think that I'm going to use my jade green since I haven't used that yet, and I sharpened it and everything. So I think I'm going to use my jade green for this one. I might have a little bit of darkness to kind of show where some of the shadows are for my trees. I also want to show you too on these trees, some of these are a little bit darker because they're kind of hidden back. And so I'm thinking that they're going to have more shade on them than the ones that are closer to the road because these treetops are covering those. Okay, so I'm going to color in my grass. I'm going to color in my sidewalk and my street here, and then we'll meet back to talk about the buildings. Okay, now we are going to move on to our final part, which is our buildings. Now there's a couple things that I want you to keep in mind while you're working on this. The first one, of course, is that we don't really have any white spaces on here. So even your windows will need to be colored in. You can use a light blue, you can use a light gray, but please make sure that you have everything colored in, because if you leave something plain, it won't necessarily look like it's white. It'll look like it's incomplete. It won't look finished. Okay, so even if you're wanting a lighter building, I would use a very, very light gray on this, maybe with a little bit of white colored penciled over that. Okay, so again, we talked about our sun being right up here. And so if our sun is up here and the lightest areas here on our trees are up here towards the top, the faces of our building, so the front of our building that's facing the street here is going to be a little bit lighter, whereas the sides, like this part and this part over here, are going to be a little bit darker. Okay, so for example, if I wanted my first building to be this kind of a brick red color, it's like a mahogany, right? Because I have a brick building going on here. What I would do is right here, I would color in a little bit lighter on the pressure, like so. Okay, so I'm using a lighter pressure here on this front part of my building. Okay, and again, I want it to be nice and smooth. I don't want it to be super liney. Okay, and then maybe I want to darken up my bricks here just a little bit to show that that's a brick that's being defined. Okay, so this would look a little bit lighter here. And then on this side over here, it would be a little bit darker. Okay, so I would press down a little bit harder using my colored pencil. And I wouldn't want to press down so hard that I get a weird texture, because I still want it to be nice and smooth, but you can kind of see the difference between these two values, right? So this one is a harder pressure, this one's a lighter pressure over here. Okay, and this is going to give me kind of that shadow look, but it's still the same color. Okay, so you can do this with whatever color you choose for your building. It's up to you, but you want to make sure that you are drawing, lighter on the front, a little darker on the side. Okay, so a little bit of a harder pressure on the side. And we still want it to be kind of nice and smooth so that we don't end up with these weird directional lines too much. Okay, and then like I said, you can make your buildings any colors you want. I made this brick, so I kind of wanted to make it an actual brick color. I'm not sure what colors I want to do on my other buildings just yet, but they don't have to necessarily be realistic. I mean, buildings are painted all different types of colors, right? Some of them have murals on the side. Some of them have a specific theme for that building, okay? But you want to make sure that you're coloring nice and smooth on this one to get your buildings finished and colored. Okay, so it'll look like that. Okay, and then for my windows, I will probably do a soft gray color like this. So I'm using super light pressure here. You could also use a light blue if you wanted to. I don't know, I'm just feeling gray today, I guess. So nice and light like that. Okay, and again, it's a little harder to see on the camera. Okay, but that way our picture doesn't look incomplete in any area. Everything has been colored over. Okay, and that is how we color in our 1-point perspective drawing. My example will be on the board for you to check out in class if you are in class. And I hope that you are having a wonderful time coloring. Happy coloring, guys.